Dr. Rand, you call it the Elizabeth MacElroy Memorial Journeys. How did this name come about?
Well, that's a very fundamental question, Duanita. Elizabeth is a friend of mine who has died. She's a young woman who died of breast cancer, and before she died, she decided that she would take her son, her 17-year-old son, to the First World War battlefield memorials in northern France, because she wanted to show him something of Canada's history that she felt was very important, that all young people, all young Canadian people needed to know. Her father, by the way, had been a history teacher, high school history teacher. So before she left for the journey, we had a last supper together, and she was telling me what she was going to do, and I said to her, well, Elizabeth, when you have died, I will continue that work. I will also go and learn about Canadian history and this particular part of it. So that's why I call these journeys the Elizabeth MacElroy Memorial Journeys.
Do you have any special connection with the breast cancer? Is that part of the
Oh yes,
connection?
well, I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh.
So we were friends in that endeavor as well.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And so how did war get connected with the breast cancer for
Well,
you?
this is a very deep and problematic and difficult question, Duanita. It has many threads to it. I don't really know an answer to that. When I was diagnosed and when I was in a very long recovery process, going through treatments, I found myself actually watching war movies. It sounds like madness, but I found them extremely riveting, and I realized I really needed to learn about history. You cannot have a psychology without seeing yourself in history. And I realized I didn't know enough about either the First World War or the Second World War. First World War in particular, because that is really when consciousness was seen to shift in the world, and obviously it's before my time, so I've had a great deal of learning to do. And I have found it strangely invigorating to actually see footage and read about that particular time of horrendous furor and change in human consciousness in the so-called Western world.
Is it the connection with devastation?
That's part of it. Well, that's part of it. The unbelievable carnage, the unbelievable machinery, the unbelievable destruction of people and land and all the nations that were involved, the sheer madness of it all. It's really mind-boggling. In my experience, one doesn't really get it fully until one goes to these incredible memorial sites in particularly northern France, where so much of the First World War was carried out. Of course, it also was in other places, Gallipoli, other places, but it is the battlefields of the Somme, Picardy, Flanders fields. They're crucial in understanding, or trying to understand, make sense of, realize the insanity of that period of our history and how Canada was involved.
Now, you said that there were sort of 5 threads of explanation with regard to why you're going, or 4?
I think there were 4, but I can't quite remember. I think we did discuss 5, but in the end I could only think of 4. Yes. One of the interesting threads for me is that the great psychologist Carl Jung was engaged in his own battle during the First World War, and he called it confrontation with the unconscious, his personal confrontation with the unconscious. And he felt that in the end, this was what we each had to do, was to engage with the unconscious individually and kind of duke it out with ourselves. And it was during this period of time that he developed the Red Book, which has come into public awareness in the last few years, was unveiled in New York a few years ago, and it's the first time that many people now are able to see this incredible work and personal work of his own encounter with the unconscious. As a good psychologist, he didn't expect his patients to do what he can't do. So if you, as a psychologist, want someone, think that someone can do this work, first you have to do it yourself and engage yourself with the incredible process of coming to know the unconscious. And in that way, we are expanded. Our worldview is expanded so that we become more full as people and not so liable necessarily to fall into collective consciousness. So that's one reason I'm very interested in this time, because it's really the birth, in a way, or the early birth pangs of depth psychology. That's one reason.
How did you first approach the battlefields? Like, how did you approach this whole area? Because it is so big that, you know, I mean, you tie together Carl Jung
Yes.
and, you know, cancer and the wars.
Yes.
And,
well, we're complicated people. If you know, if we
Yes.
actually spoke to anybody, if they could, they would actually thread many things together in their lives. We tend not to speak like that. We tend to be very one-threaded in our discourse and our self-understanding. But actually, we're all very complex. And I happened to find this clump of threads that had meaning in my life. So how did I actually start? Well, as you know, Duanita, I've been very interested in the story of Mary Magdalene for many, many years now, and have travelled widely to learn more about her. And one day, when I was in the Cluny Museum in Paris, Musée de Moyen Âge, the Middle Ages, there was this lovely, lovely, I think about 3 foot high statue of Mary Magdalene. She's with a wonderful turban, and she's actually teaching. She's holding a book and she's teaching. And of course, I'm interested in all the different pictures of Mary Magdalene, different than perhaps how we've imagined her. Anyway, after about 3 times of looking at this little statue, I suddenly realized, oh, this was made and sculpted in the workshop of Jean Lepeau in a town called Arras. And then I suddenly thought, oh, that town appears in a tremendous amount of war history, Canadian war history, and so I'm going to start this journey of mine by going to Arras. Of course, Jean Lepeau's studio is not there anymore. You know, this is centuries ago when she was made. But that's actually how I started. And the other thing is, of course, Duanita, the whole of northern France was involved in the making of incredible tapestries. And as you know, I'm an embroiderer and weaver, and so that's an area of interest for me. I mean, I could go on about this forever, but that's one of the threads, my interest in tapestry and weaving, and the whole wool commerce between England and France, because England's just across the channel and my mother's home is right across the channel. So there are many threads.